Okay, I'm going to do, now that I've got this shelving unit up, I'm going to do a quick tutorial because I'm going to use the hooks down here which are at the bottom of the shelving unit, which you can see the scissors hanging from. I'm going to use those to hang small jars from, which will be useful for storing small items, things like cocktail sticks, cotton buds, that kind of thing, small sponges, which I'll then use in my crafting. I've done something similar on the side of this shelving unit, which you can see here for my brushes. It's a larger jar, and that just hangs from a sort of belt thing that I made, and that's attached to the side of the unit. And it just hangs there under its own weight, really. The belt is made out of a vinyl, so it's got a bit of grip to it. If there was any doubt, you could always put an elastic band behind that on the glass itself, underneath, and that would be enough to hold the glass in place without it slipping through that belt. Anyway, it's there at the moment without that elastic band, and it seems quite secure, so that's good. But this version I'm going to make to hang underneath this shelving unit. I'm going to make it out of smaller jars, and I don't want to have the little belts on them because they're going to hang from these hooks. The way I'm going to do that is tie a length of ribbon around the jar screw top, which is at the top of the jar, and then hang that from the hook, and that'll be enough to hang it at a slight angle, and then I can access easily the things inside the jar, because obviously this is underneath the actual shelf, so if it was hanging straight you wouldn't really be able to get at the things inside it, so it needs to hang at an angle so that you can actually get the things out without having to remove the jar from the hook. So next thing to do is to show you my setup for painting the jars. Okay, so first things first, these are the jars I'm going to be doing. It's a small jar for, I think that's probably for cotton buds. That one would be great for sponges, with it having a really wide top to it, and that one would be probably for cocktail sticks. So first things first, I've washed the jars, made sure they're thoroughly clean. I don't need the lids, so I'll remove those, and if I come across anything I can use lids for, then they'll be great, but probably won't need them. And then the next thing to do is to paint the jars. So what I've got is I've got a bowl here for mixing, and another one which just has water in it, and I've got a sponge in here at the moment as well. And I'm going to use these, which are Pebeo Vitrea paints, which are a water-based paint. They do two different types of glass paints. Vitrea, which is water-based and ought to be cooked in the oven for a short while if it's going to be used and washed and things, but just for the sake of decorating a jar for storage, you don't really need to do that. If you wanted to, you could, and it would then mean that you could wash the jar if you needed to at some point. But for now, I'm just going to leave them on the surface, and I won't cook the jars. But if you do want to cook them, you just cook them in an oven for at 160 degrees C, 40 minutes. And that's enough to set the paint, and it means that it can go through normal dishwasher. So the colours I'm using, I'm going to make a sort of duck egg blue colour, so I've got my usual, I've got the blue and the green, and I'm going to make that into a pale colour, so I've got a white to thin that down. So start off with the white and then add a little bit of the colour to it. I want to make it quite pale. The ones that I showed you already are quite strong in colour, and I don't want these jars to be quite so strong in colour. So next thing to do is to mix the colour. I've got a paintbrush, which is great for getting the paint out of the jars, and also for mixing it in here, which is going to be my mixing bowl. And I've also got, as always, you need to have some tissue paper or something to wipe your brushes or whatever. Because these are water-based paints, I've got my water in the bowl, which I can use to wash the sponge and also wash the brush. So let's go. I don't think it's necessary for you to be able to see this in real time, so we'll fast forward this process. Okay, Okay, so as you can see, the colour that's in there, it's already quite strong. I mean, I've really put the tiniest little bit of colour into the white. Those pigments in the blue and the green are very strong colours. So you must be careful when you mix these, just to go very careful on these colours. To lighten this would take a lot of white. I'm going to be sponging this on, so it's going to go on quite pale anyway, so I'm happy with this colour. But just if you're going to use these colours, be aware that the dark colours are very, very strong in pigment, so you must be careful not to use too much if you want to make a paler colour by putting white with it. Add it a tiny little bit at a time. Anyway, that's a good colour for me. And what I'm going to do first is I'm also going to use this, which is the frosted medium. I'm going to sponge that all over the jar, and then what I want to do, if you remember from the other jars, they have a gradient in colour, so what I want to do is make the whole jar frosted, and then I want to, from the bottom upwards, gradiate that blue colour onto it. So first of all is just to add the frosted medium to the whole jar. For this I'm going to use my sponge, and you don't have to put this into a bowl to start you off. It's literally, you can add it straight onto the sponge and dab it all over the jar, which is what I'm going to do. I'm just squeezing off all the excess moisture that I can from this sponge, because I don't want to thin this paint out. I'm even trying to dry it off a bit on this bit of tissue. Just take away as much of the moisture as I can. So, just add this straight onto the sponge. Find a nice fairly flat piece of sponge that you can manipulate, and just upend the pot. And that's enough to get this going. So I'm going to hold the jar, the edge and then the bottom, because the bottom will get covered with the other paint, and it's really only the top part of the jar that I'm going to be painting with this frosting medium, so I can work my way around and hold onto the jar quite easily. So then just dab it on. I need to move it round and just do that. I need to put some more paint onto the sponge. Okay. It's not very obvious that there's much on this jar at the moment, but there is. It's fully covered. What I'm going to do now is just going to let that dry whilst I work on the next two jars, and I'll work my way through all the three jars. This, with it being water-based, will dry fairly quickly, so by the time I finish the third jar, the first jar will be just about ready to do the other colour. We'll fast forward through this. Okay, when you've finished with each colour, you can just wash the sponge in water, and then let that dry for a bit longer. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to sponge over the frosted medium with the white, just to give a nice sort of pale graduation with that blue, so that it looks like it sort of goes to a sort of soft, pale, virtually nothing, and then goes frosted. So that's the point. So I'm just going to wash this sponge out and then let that dry. And the jars, they'll take another few minutes to dry, and we'll come back to that when they are. So that's good. So just let that dry for a bit. Put the lid on the pot. This frosted medium I haven't used before, so it'll be interesting to see how frosted it is. But once that's dry, we'll soon see. It does look like it's going a bit frosted on the first jar that I did already. It's not going to be possible to see on the camera, so I won't show you, but perhaps when it's dry it'll be a bit more obvious. I still want to be able to see the things that are in the jar through it, so I don't want it to be completely opaque, which is why I'm not just putting white on there. So I want the frosted effect, so we'll come back to that when that's dry. Okay, so these have now fully dried, and if I show you, you can just about make out that they are definitely slightly different in and opacity of the front. If I put my hand inside, you can see it's not very clear. So it has worked anyway, so it has gone quite translucent anyway when it's dried. So next stage is to put the white coat on, which is the white Vitrea. So again, just like with the frosted version, just literally put it straight onto a good part of the sponge. It's quite a big spot there. Right, that's a bit there. You can just about make out how it's got slightly more white towards the bottom. I'll make that more pronounced. I'll let it dry a little bit first, do the other two jars, and then maybe come back to that with another coat. Second one. And that's the third one. Okay, and then just again let that dry a bit. I might come back to this other one, this first one. It takes a little bit more than I said to dry, because it's not heated in here, so it's going to take another maybe 20 minutes to dry. So I'll come back to that. Okay, so the white is now dry. As you can see, I went back and put the second layer on top of this middle jar, which I did first. And it's definitely made it a lot more opaque. So the next stage now is just to put the blue, which is going to go on the base of the pot, and also just around the sort of bottom third of the edge of it. And then when it's dried, upside down, so that it doesn't stick to the table, obviously. Okay, let's go. This is my blue, which I had mixed up, as you know. Give it a quick stir just to make sure that the colour is all still well mixed. And I can actually use the brush to start me off putting the colour on the bottom of this jar. Okay, so that's a really nice colour, that. I love this blue. Just about make out the colour there, I think. Anyway, I'm going to go to the sponge now and put that around the bottom edge. And once it's dry, it may need another coat on the bottom just to go a bit more opaque on the bottom, because that hasn't had any of the white so far. So we'll see how it goes, but there'll be plenty of paint to do that if we need to. Okay. So you can just about see there now, got a really subtle effect from the frosted area through the white, through to the pale blue. I'm going to let that dry and then possibly go back over the base again just to give it a bit more colour. So that's that. Really just want a subtle effect though. Dry off now, and I'll come back to it and put another layer of colour on the bottom, but that's it.